Does AI have your creatives on edge? Is your content strategy in line with a world where people binge on 15-second videos and search with AI? Today we're talking to Drew Brucker, head of brand and content at Goldcast, about all of that and more. Welcome to Conversations with MarTech.
It's great to be here. My name is Drew Brucker, head of brand and content at Goldcast. We're a video content operating system. So I think the best way to describe us is really this end-to-end process for marketers to create, repurpose, and distribute content all in one place. Video first content, obviously, for a number of reasons, I'm sure we'll get into, but is more important now than ever. So that's what we do in a nutshell, is we focus on those creation, repurpose, and distribution pillars of video first content. And I've been there for about 6 months, but I've been in SaaS for the last decade plus. So I've been leading content teams, marketing teams at large. And then I've just been just like everybody else, but a really first mover on the generative AI front.
All right. So Goldcast put out its webinar benchmark report. And one of the things that you guys talked about in that report was how people are repurposing content, like you talked about a few seconds ago, and how they're using AI to help them do that. When you think about AI generated content, right, I feel like there's bad examples all around us. We've all seen stuff and heard stuff that just kind of makes your skin crawl. What are some of the best uses of AI that your customers are doing these days?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Obviously, that's there are a lot of cringy moments that have existed lately with AI's help. But I think like it's interesting because bad AI content creation is very easy to spot, or at least right now it is. And I feel like good execution of that is invisible, for the most part, right? You just don't even see it. You don't notice it. You don't even know it's there. So I think it feels like you, in some ways, if it's you, you're the one creating it yourself. And it's an extension of you in that front. Now, I would say the best uses are really getting into very specific things, right? So when I first started using AI, I was focused a lot on ideation, which was, I think, a lot of, it was that core way people were using it at first. And then, the more you use it, I'm sure anybody can relate to this that's using AI quite a bit, is you just start to find more and more use cases for it. Right? It becomes organic and it weaves itself into that sort of that part of your workflow. For me, the best use cases I've seen for this would be, really at large, going from 0 to 1, right? So again, you've heard this a bunch, but you can't expect to copy and paste anything out of an AI tool unless you've just absolutely crushed on the context part of this. Right. And that is the meaty part that people just don't spend enough time doing, or don't have the know-how to do. Right. Because the more context you give it, the better and better those outputs become. So I think from that standpoint, the best ways I've seen this be used is, we could take a transcript. I'll give you a personal example. I also do a podcast that's focused around AI image and video creation. And if I'm creating that podcast, right, I've got the transcript for this. Well, I can very quickly create content for that podcast based on the transcript, title, description, timestamps, right? Like all of those things, but it's only as good as the context I give it, right? The first time I ran that experiment, the output was like, timestamps were off, sounded like, like everything, right? But as I did more and more episodes, I refined those prompts and I got that to a really good place. And now all it is basically a chain of thought system of prompts that I run and I get great results on. So, that's a particular usage. I would say, thinking about things like turning into a 45-minute webinar and creating net new content from that, right? And net new content in that sense could be short form clips, medium clips, right? It could also be filled with ideas that were given in the chat, in the messages, in the Q&A, in the polls, right? So like there are a lot of things now that can be created easily But now it's like almost like the efficiency part of it comes into play, right? It's not so much about the idea itself anymore. It's about the execution.
Yeah, and that's a good segue to my next question. Those of us who've been at this for a long time, I think we've built up frustration over the years with the speed, especially when it comes to images and video. It seems like there's always a bottleneck there because there were fewer people who had the skills and the tools who were empowered to do that. Like, how important is AI to speeding up those workflows?
It's so important. It's beyond important. It's at this point, right? Like it's inevitable and it's a non-negotiable. Creativity has essentially been democratized, and what I mean by that is, I think Canva maybe is a good example long term. In terms of like when Canva joined the scene, right? It was like this accessibility to quality design that you didn't have to be a designer to use, right? Now, there were still levels to that, right? And good design is good design. So there's still things that come into play like taste and curation. But I think that's like a more practical example of, how that would actually work in the real world with bottlenecking. With democratization of creativity in general, though, now what we've seen is anybody can generate an image. Anybody can generate an image and put it into motion. Anybody can generate an image in motion and add sound to it now, right? Using any tool, really. Like I love to use Midjourney, but you can create images, ads, anything you want that is custom on the fly now. All you need to do is know how to prompt to do it. That's unlike anything we've ever seen before. So I think creativity not only had a big bottleneck there, but you also had limited resources, whereas now you can really empower anybody to do these things. And that's where we're kind of sitting, is there's like this knowledge gap that exists. You might have a few people on teams that know AI and these things really, really well, but at large, right, the benchmark is still like, yeah, I've been in there a few times. I know a couple things. Whenever that comes to that next level and that next phase and we sort of like graduate, that's when things are going to get really, really interesting, in my opinion. And so, creativity's been democratized. Content has been democratized if you know how to do it well.
How does that change the work of the creatives and the content creators? Like, especially the video and the image people. A lot of people can write to some extent, but you had to have talent and some software know-how 3-4 years ago to do
100%. Yeah.
So how does their role change? Do they become like an overseer of what other people are doing?
I think so. Like, I think that's one of the ways that I definitely see that taking place. Like, I just touched on this a minute ago, but you can generate any image you want, but you still have to have the skill set, the eye, the taste. How do you pick the best image out of 50 that you generated? Well, that comes down to scale reps, right? Like, you have to actually know how to do these things. So yes, things have been democratized, but that next phase of that is also sort of like the curation of it. Weirdly enough, I've also used AI to help me there. Like, I'm just getting really tactical here, but like, if I'm designing something, whether it's a personal project or for something for work or whatever, I can take a screenshot of that, provide context around what this is, what it's for, what an ideal, input looks like, and then have it grade on certain variables, and then also provide recommendations on how I can improve that design functionality, right? It's like, well, you should, if you've thought about using typography here, this is where I place it. Oh, okay, interesting, right? And then it's like, well, maybe what kind of typeface should I use? Oh, well, this should be done here, right? Well, you could do this in Photoshop, but it's like, well, I don't know how to do that. Can you give me clear step-by-step instructions? Yes. Right. So like there's even that side of it now that is kind of entered the fold, which has been incredible for me, because I am a designer. I'm a photographer. I love brand. I do all that stuff, but I'm in a lot of ways self-taught. Right. So it's a great way to continue to have a learner student mindset, level up, and get validation on ideas in that sense. So I think it's definitely changing. I don't have all the answers to it, but I've talked with enough people, and I think we've kind of gotten out of that creativity scaredness now, And a lot more folks have embraced this over the last 6, 12, 18 months. 2 years ago, everybody was fighting, on the creative side. They did not want to have this conversation.
Yeah. And then everybody starts to dip their toes into the AI waters. And then we didn't even talk about kind of the other problem that comes, which is the brand guidelines, that when a few people had control over the creative, they could be trusted to use the right font and the right colors and the right words. And when you democratize it,
Yes. And like, this is where custom GPTs are interesting, right? Because you can train these on very specific principles or context. And so maybe brand guidelines is a good example. It's like you could feed, custom GPT, the context behind your guidelines, all of those very specific things. And then essentially you could use this as a actionable conversational tool that maybe you empower others to interact with that are outside of the department if somebody's unreachable, or they do want to double check with somebody and don't want to have to wait on an answer, right? It's like, hey, look, does this fit within our guidelines that we've set visually? If not, where do we go wrong here? Right. And so I think like there are creative use cases like that. Custom GPTs, I think, are very interesting. You still have the large language model, but it's for a very specific purpose within it. And so you have all the firepower of the vast knowledge, but you also have this context that you don't have to provide over and over again. And it was interesting because with this webinar benchmark report, specifically, what we did was something different. We decided to take that report and build a custom GPT based on the report. So we fed all the findings that we had, data, takeaways, tactics, right? All the things that we basically put into the long form article, and then put that into a custom GPT to bring it to life. Right now, we've embedded that into the piece of our, on our website with this report. So it's like, now somebody could go in. What was that stat? I don't have to go back and look because I might have saved this GPT in my sidebar, right? And now I can just kind of pull things out. And based on the way that you have that GPT set up, maybe somebody wants to spit out a quick fact about the webinar benchmark report. That would be a great post on LinkedIn. Maybe they want to know the best day to host a webinar. Like all of those things now, I don't have to go search. I don't have to do no control F. I don't have to go, maybe I lost the document that I downloaded, so now I got to go back in the gated form and fill it out. So this is sort of like this interesting time where things like that are interesting experiments for us marketers to run and just kind of see, like, does this make it more actionable? Does this make it more memorable? Does this provide a more organic experience that people can access and use the data that's in front of them?
Back to the webinar benchmark report. On the one hand, we're talking about AI, which has burst on the scene in the past few years. And then we've also got webinars, which are probably about 25 years old as a concept now, as a content type. What else have you seen about webinars, and what else maybe have you seen about webinars that's impacted by everything that's going on with people's short attention spans and their ability to generate just about anything on a dime?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if I love or hate this analogy, but I think webinars are I think they're the cockroaches of content. They survive anything, right? Pandemics, pivots, budgets. It's it feels very true, right? They've been around for a long time. They have evolved. I think sort of like the modern approach that we're seeing, we're adopting personally, is this idea, and I don't even think it's new. I just think we're seeing more and more people start to use it this way, which is, you've created this great piece of content. Let's just call it an hour-long webinar. You've put so much energy into the before and during, but do you also have a plan for the after with repurposing? Right? Because sometimes it gets to this point too, where you're just like, oh man, like, put so much work, I'm glad it's over. But if you're not proactively in your mind, in your team, thinking about what we're doing after with that content, you're going to be so tired. You're like, I'm done with that. Like, on to the next thing, right? Because it's over. Check the box in your mind. So that repurpose aspect is interesting because these types of long form treatments, whether it's a podcast or a webinar, they provide different formats. And you and I were just kind of talking about this before we recorded, which is you could take that long form. Now you've got short clips. Maybe these are 2-3 minutes or less, right? Those short, punchy things that you just want to have those one line memorable parts. You've got sort of like this medium format, which could be maybe anywhere from like 3 to 5, 7 minutes, where maybe you're attacking a very specific topic or subsection. And then you've got the long form piece, right?
Yep.
And so why just have things die with that one asset? We're seeing a lot more people use webinars on demand, first of all, but then in the repurposing, you start layering in these things. Maybe you've got 5 good short clips. Maybe you've got 3 or 4 or 5 of these medium clips. Then you're using those across different platforms, right? So all of that is going with a video first content strategy, which we know people want video. It's the preferred method of content consumption right now. That's objective data. That's not just my opinion. So I think from that lens, it's incredibly powerful. Going back to what we kind of mentioned too, which was these webinars create net new opportunities. As a content person, I want to know who my audience is. I'm super interested in the messages and the chats that get left in the webinar. I'm super interested in how people answer polls in the webinar, the questions, the answers, what didn't we get to? And you start to identify what really matters, right? Not just guesses, but you're getting validation on those things. And so I think that evolution of treating long form things like webinars, like podcasts to fuel your content engine is now starting to be more and more adopted. Again, don't think it's brand new concept, but I think you're starting to see people really come down to that, right? Because there is more content now than ever, right? You can't get away with just posting once or twice here and there. It's got to be cadenced. It's got to be volume. Volume also gives you plenty of experiments to try and understand what's working and what's not.
Yeah. You also, the long form content isn't everybody's jam.
Nope.
Right. Nope. So you're either telling them you can't get the message that was in this event if you're not going to break it up, or you have to force yourself to find 45 minutes or an hour, or maybe watch the on demand on 2x to speed it up. But people, it's still a bit of a TikTok world, right? Like, we have people consuming content in 15-second chunks, and you have people who will sit there for 45 to 60 minutes, and you've got to do something to address all of them.
And I love that you bring it up. Like, you might have certain things that you would stay on an hour for. I probably do too. What those things are, they may be different. They're different from person to person. Also, I think going back to like this idea of like, if you're a brand, you got to be sort of like operating under this mindset of 0-click content. Just get it to the place that's going to be seen, right? Because so much of it doesn't get seen. And what I mean by that is, like, rather than hiding certain things, I'm not saying everything should be ungated or gated, right? If it's worth it, probably gate it. But you genuinely, as a brand, want your best, most valuable things to be shared as widely as possible, not hidden behind a gate or a curtain or whatever, right? I mean, again, that's very scenario based, but I think at large, that's what's at play here. And going back to the formats and the timing and the different digestion methods of content, right? That's why you have to be operating with that mindset first.
Yeah. Since you're a brand guy, I got to ask, in the big picture of marketing, is brand making a bit of a comeback? We've talked about a lot here, search traffic waning in the AI 0-click, as you just mentioned before, the 0-click world. Performance marketing has taken some hits over the past few years as to its effectiveness. So is the pendulum swinging back to brand?
I have lots of thoughts here. Well, one, brand never left, but you would think that it did, right? You would think that it did based on certain places like LinkedIn, in some echo chambers, different mediums, etc. I think it's quite a interesting thing, because I think in the B2B startup world, brand is always something that kind of falls farther down the ladder than I would prefer personally, right? Because I think if you're a creative, you know the impact of design. You know the impact of visual communication, right? And feelings that can be portrayed and conveyed through that medium specifically. And what happens, I think, just in my experience in startup world is it tends to come way further down. You don't have a designer at a Series A company most of the time, right? Who's doing that? Like you better hope you have somebody that can use, something really well, Canva or generate it. I mean, something, right? But I think a lot of brands just don't think about that until the revenue comes, right? They want revenue first before they start to develop the brand plays. I think in a perfect world, I would love to see that be the opposite. Right? I mean, sure, there are plenty of things that I think arguments on both sides. And I'm not saying that one feels incredibly right over the other, but that pendulum should be more on the brand side. You have to convey who you are, the feeling, the differentiator, all the things that you're trying to provide with the first impression and your lasting impression to drive revenue-driven conversations, in my opinion, right? Because otherwise you're just focused on this very, very specific and timely need. Versus sort of like conveying this community, this emotion, this story, all of the things that come with that. So I have a feeling you and I probably think a lot alike here. That's just me kind of like on my soapbox with that, just because I think startups think about brand way too late in the game, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's very hard to convince a lead to do business with you if they don't know who you are. And if you're able to lay the foundation, it's like entering the game in the third quarter, right? If your first couple of conversations are going to be, this is who we are and this is where we came from, this is what we do, you're pretty far away from closing a sale.
I'll give you one thing to kind of wrap up this particular question too, which is what sticks with me quite a bit. And you just reminded me of this, but at Goldcast we talk a lot about mindshare marketing. Which again is the idea that you're thought of in the first place, right? If you're not thought of in the first place, forget it. You're not closing a deal.
Yeah, I think most of the research there says there's about 3 brands that come to mind when someone goes in market. And if you're not one of the 3, your chances of getting picked are way, way down.
So what are brands and companies doing to cater to that, right? Because you have to drive brand recall, memorability, mindshare. And so we're really focused on educating about that concept too, because I think it's 80-something +%. I'll have to grab the exact figure. Objective data shows that they ultimately choose the first brand that they thought of for that particular solve. Okay, so how are we measuring that? Are marketing teams actively trying to drive memorability? Or are we just trying to get like form fills and MQLs and this and that and the other, right?
I think that's the heart of the brand versus performance marketing conversation is which one were you able to measure and show us, right?
Yeah. And that's what's really interesting, right? Because if I know you and I don't know, we've maybe done this podcast. Let's say you're the head of marketing at a SaaS company. I don't have a need for your product right now. But when I do, I'm thinking about you. I already have an affinity toward that brand through a person in the company. And that's why things like employee-led posting and things on LinkedIn and, that's why that dark social is a thing. That's why all these sort of that's how deals get done, right? It's not necessarily about, somebody going to Google, that's mindshare marketing software, sure, it happens, but you don't have to spend a lot of money to optimize for those keywords on Google search, for example. So you have that checked. What are you doing about the rest of it, right? And that's the part that we all need to figure out.
All right. Drew Brucker, head of brand at Goldcast. Thanks for joining us on Conversations with MarTech.
Pleasure, Mike. Thanks for having me, man.